Hello, I'm Miss Julie, and welcome to Riverside Kids Sunday School. It's so good to see you back again. Today, we're going to be talking about the book of Judges. So, what do you think of when you hear the word judge? Well, if you're like me, you think of these people who work in courtrooms and wear these long black robes. They sometimes have to pound a gavel that's kind of a hammer-like thing to get people's attention. And at least in TV, there are always these super serious, no-nonsense sort of people. And we know that they have a lot of authority in a courtroom and even in our society. Well, a long time ago, God's people, the Israelites, had judges too. The people would go to these judges to help them settle disputes and solve problems. Just like today, they were people in the society that had a lot of authority. Well, today we're going to be talking about 3 of those judges. I'm only going to give you a quick summary of their stories, but I would definitely encourage you to look at the book of Judges and read it. There are some wonderful stories in there that will help teach you, and they can be pretty entertaining too. So last week you learned about Joshua. After Joshua died, the Israelite people got into really a bad pattern. What would happen is that they would lose their focus on God and start to worship these false gods. When they started to worship these false gods, they seemed to always get in a lot of trouble. For instance, enemy armies would attack them and take them over. Then they would cry out to God for help. And indeed, God would help. And the people would be right with God for a while, and then they would fall back into the same pattern of worshiping false gods. So today we're going to be focusing on how God does help his people, and particularly in the book of Judges, how he used 3 judges to help his people at different times. So the first of those judges was a woman named Deborah. And she might have looked something like this. Now, Deborah was a judge at a time when the Israelite people were being defeated by a king named Jabin, and he was king of Canaan. Jabin oppressed the people of Israel for 20 years, and indeed the people cried out to God for help. And God used Deborah to do that. Actually, he also used a general called Barak, who was going to lead an army of 10,000 Israelites to try to defeat Jabin. But this general Barak really didn't want to go. I think he was afraid. So he went to Deborah and said, "Hey, Deborah, if you go with me, I'll go into battle and lead the army with you." And indeed she did. She went into battle as well. And the army of God did defeat Jabin and his army. Next is the story of a man named Gideon. Now, God called Gideon to deliver the Israelites when the Midianites were mistreating them. Particularly, the Midianites were taking all their food from their fields and their storehouses, so they were practically starving. They would have to hide their food from the Midianites if they wanted to have anything. So God called Gideon to lead an army against these Midianites and defeat them. At first, Gideon raised a pretty large army of thousands of people. But then God said, "Hey, if you defeat the Midianites with this large army, then everybody will just assume it's the army, not me, God." So he had Gideon reduce the size of his army to only 300 people, and that's not a lot. He also instructed Gideon to give all of the soldiers a torch and a horn, and then at night to go surround the place where the Midianite army was camping. So what happened is that the men in Gideon's army blew their horns really loud in the night and then showed their torches. It was very much like this picture. That surprised and totally confused the Midianite army. And what happened is the Midianite army they started killing each other because they were so confused about what was going on. And then those that weren't killed were just ran away. And they basically didn't even have to fight, at least not a traditional fight. God, through Gideon, helped them to drive that enemy army out. Once again, God's people rejoiced. They were so happy that this happened. And they were good with God for a while. But then they fell into sin again. And because they started worshiping false gods, they started being oppressed by the Philistines. The Philistines ruled over them for 40 years. And once again, the Israelites called out to God for help. And God did help them, but in an unusual way. At the time, a man named Samson was a judge. This is Samson right here. Samson was incredibly strong enough to defeat lions and so forth. But Samson also messed up. He fell in love with the wrong woman. That woman kind of tricked him, and he told her things he shouldn't have told her. He told her things that he knew God would not want. And because of that, he lost his strength and was captured by the Philistines. And the Philistines actually blinded him as well. So here he is, captured and blinded by the Philistines, but God has still wanted to use him. So what happened is that the Philistines were throwing this big old party. They brought in Samson, their captive, really just to make fun of him. But while the party was going on, Samson basically told God that he wanted to be used to defeat the Philistines. God gave him his strength back, and he used that great strength to knock down pillars that were holding up the roof in the building that the party was going on. When he knocked down those pillars, the roof fell down on all the people who were at the party, mostly Philistines. But it also fell down on Samson here too, and Samson died in the process. So God used Samson, even though Samson was killed, to defeat the Philistines in this case. So, let's see if you were paying attention. That was a lot of information in a fairly short amount of time. I am going to read you a few questions. And if I see you, which I hope that I can sometime, I would love to hear your answers. If you get some of those answers right, then we'll have to think about a way to reward you for your good memory and your good learning. Okay, so here are the questions. Why were the Israelites being oppressed? And that's in all three of the stories. What happened when the Israelites called out to God for help? Again, that's in all three stories too. Name the three judges that God raised up to help Israel. Which judge was a woman? How many men did Deborah tell Barak to take into battle against King Jabin? How many men did Gideon take into battle? What army did Gideon and his troops defeat? How did Samson defeat the Philistines? So once again, think about the answers to all of those. Tell me when you see me, and then we'll talk more about judges. So, what are the big lessons that we can learn from these stories? Well, I can think of at least two. One goes back to the fact that the Israelites kept on sinning. They kept on worshiping these other gods that weren't the true God. So why did they keep on doing this? Well, it seems to me that after a while, they kind of forgot all the things that God had done for them. They basically did not keep their eyes and their hearts focused on God. Now, we can go back and read these stories and think things like, oh, these people were so stupid. Why didn't they keep on following God? We'd never do things like that. But if you think about our lives, you'll realize that we're not perfect either. We can all have times in our lives, sometimes just a day, sometimes longer than that, where we also take our eyes off God. And we'll forget about the wonderful things that He had done for us and the ways that He has helped us. And we do know that God helps us, and we need to thank Him for that. In fact, the memory verse for today is this from Psalms. It says, God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in times of trouble. Well, we need to keep our eyes on God, realizing that He is our help and our strength, remembering the times He has helped us, and make sure that we don't fall into that same pattern as the Israelites did. Another big lesson from all three stories is that God uses unlikely people to help. And that's definitely the case with these three judges that we learned about today. First of all, Deborah was a woman. And back in the day that this happened, women definitely did not have equal rights to men. They were really looked down on. So the fact that a general, Barak, asked Deborah for help means that Deborah was not only well respected, but it was also incredibly unusual. Now let's turn to Gideon. If you read that whole story, you'll realize that Gideon was basically kind of a nobody in his village or community. Nobody really looked up to him or anything like that. And we also learned that Gideon really didn't want to lead that army. He tried almost every trick in the book to get out of it. But despite that, God used Gideon in miraculous ways to get rid of this army that was starving this whole group of people. And finally, we see Samson. Now, Samson was kind of a natural leader. Even before he was born, his parents were told that Samson was going to be special. And indeed, God gave him great strength. Despite that, though, Samson really messed up on a number of occasions. Even though he really messed up and fell very low to be a prisoner of the enemy and blind, God still used him. And Samson was ready for God to use him at that point, at least, to defeat the Philistines and again to help his people. I am so glad that God uses unlikely and very imperfect people to help others and to advance His kingdom. So, think about this. Think about keeping your eyes on God, and think about keeping your ears and heart open to what God has for you and how you can help. So until I see you again, have a great day and read the book of Judges. That is my challenge for you.